Hello friends, my name is Marines, and today I'll be talking about the first batch of books that I read in 2019. Book number 1 is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is a story of a young girl whose mother commits suicide, and she is convinced that after her mother dies, her mother turns into a bird. The main character in the story is biracial. She's half white, half Asian, and following her mother's death, she travels to Taiwan to meet her maternal grandparents for the very first time and to go in search of her mother, who is now a bird. While she's there, she learns a lot about her mother and some family secrets and the reason why she never met her grandparents before. It's a book that should have been right up my alley because it is flowery and very beautifully written and all about an exploration of grief. That probably gave away a little of how I felt about it, but it was truly a very frustrating start to my reading year because I wanted to love this so much, but one key flaw in the story kept me from really loving it, and that flaw is that it is very poorly paced and overly long. I'll start with the positive because there are positives here, and as I mentioned, it is very flowery, very well written, and very richly described. The author uses the senses and a lot of colors in order to bring this magical realism story to life. There were passages about grief and about what the main character was going through that I thought were really effective. I really enjoyed the representation here, not only because the main character was half Taiwanese, but also because of all of the mental health stuff in here. The main character's mother struggles with depression before her suicide, and the way that that is handled and the way that you see how depression can affect a whole entire family group, I thought was really interesting, so I appreciated that piece of it. Also really loved the main male interest. He's an important part because he's her best friend, but it's also like a romance that's truly in the background. I just really liked the guy because he was nice and just very sweet, and I don't know, something about the relationship and Axel of the guy I thought was really sweet. That all said, this seriously needed to be like 100 pages shorter. Easily 100 pages. It wasn't only that it was overly long and overly descriptive, it was that we were taking the main character into the same scenarios over and over again, and in being kind of navel-gazy or introspective, the main character kept asking herself questions about her own grief, and it was things that the audience could have gotten there by themselves, especially like the second or third time that they were being repeated. There wasn't enough plot to really hold together the middle of this story. It just kept going on and on and on in the same exact ways, and it just kept getting me more and more frustrated because, again, I should love this. It's perfect for me. I think that as a debut author, I'm pretty sure she's a debut author, it gives me hope for some of her future work and just kind of learning and having people around her who will help her learn how to tighten her stories, because that is seriously the only thing that I think this was missing. Overall, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Book number 2 was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Jenkins Reid. This is such a hyped book here on BookTube and like everywhere. Everyone loves this book. It was a book of the month pick for me in June 2017. So it sat on my shelf for a year and a half before I picked it up, and of course during that time I'd been hearing all of the hype about this book, and I have to say that all that hype I think is well deserved. This is a historical fiction book about a Hollywood icon, Evelyn Hugo, who decides to hire a small-time writer to basically tell the story of her life. Evelyn tells the writer and us, the reader, the story of her rise to fame in 1950s Hollywood, and we follow her career until she decides to leave the business in the 80s. And as the title implies, we learn about the 7 husbands that she acquires along the way and the one true love of her life. I think that as the hype was rolling in, I was hesitant to pick this up because that is just a brain thing that happens to me sometimes. My best friend Nicole read it last year though and mentioned it several times privately and a couple times on the podcast that I really need to read this, so I made it a priority in 2019. I think the main selling point for me here is that this is a gripping story of a complex and fully realized character. Even while reading about her sensational life, all of the details about her relationships and her life and her choices made it feel like I was reading about a real person. There was a feeling of drama here, but in the best possible way. It reminded me a lot of watching Spanish novelas. It had that same edge of your seat juiciness. This book is also great for its representation in a number of ways. First, the main character Evelyn is bisexual, and no, that isn't a spoiler. Second, the book explores her career as an actress in the 50s and 60s up to the 80s, as I mentioned, and because of that, it really does say a lot about misogyny and her treatment as a woman in Hollywood in this time period. Plus, you really get to see how people perceive Evelyn as a woman who puts her career goals first and is ambitious. Third, Evelyn is a daughter of Cuban immigrants, so the story touches on how she had to compromise her background, not only as a Cuban woman, but as coming from a poor family in order to make it in Hollywood. There is a scene in particular in which Evelyn thinks about losing Spanish, the skill of speaking Spanish fluently, and man, did that hit home. My only complaint about this book is that while it is well written in terms of its characters, its plot, its stakes, it is sometimes a little simply written when it is describing things. I have a feeling that's part of what makes this so easily consumable, but it stood out to me a little bit sometimes when she was like describing vast love and it was something very trite and simple. In all, though, I really loved this. It is worth the hype, and I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 3 was My Own Devices by Dessa. This is a non-fiction book. It is true stories from the road on music, science, and senseless love. Dessa is a recording artist. She's a rapper who first got put on my radar because of NerdCon Stories. She was a guest at NerdCon Stories. She was amazing in everything that I saw her on, and then she came back on my radar because she was on the Hamilton mixtape with one of my favorite tracks on the Hamilton mixtape. So she's somebody that I've admired her music before and just her presence and her ability to weave words. And so when I found out through Caitlin, who from Book Chats, that this was out in the world, I immediately picked it up and I listened to her read it on audiobook. I got the audiobook and the ebook from the library, and as soon as I finished it, I ordered a physical copy because I loved it. As the title suggests, Dessa takes us through kind of the beginning of her music career, especially because that is when she met one of her label mates and they started dating, and they dated on and off for a very large chunk of her life. And so she talks about love and being hung up on this person. She talks about music. She talks about being on the road, and she also dedicates a chapter to her mother, her father, and her brother, which were 3 of the most emotional chapters and beautifully written chapters, I thought. I just enjoyed them immensely because you guys know I love family feels. So I loved that there was a great balance of all of these aspects of her life. She's obviously a great writer. It's what she does with her music, and I think that that comes through very well in this story. There is a portion of the story that kind of veers into the science part. She starts thinking about brain chemistry and the fact that she's still in love and hung up on this person after so many years. So she does some like shock therapy, some experimental things in order to try and cure herself of this love. It is super interesting to read about, and I think that I really enjoy how it ended and the conclusions that she reaches because of this whole progress. Again, it's a great mix of things. It's an easy, quick read, and it's one that I will read again, which is very interesting because it is nonfiction. I'm not usually like, I want to read that person's story again, but I want to read Dessa's story again, for sure. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, book number 4 was The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. It's a pet peeve of mine to hear people review contemporary poetry and do it in a way that makes fun of poetry and like, oh, line breaks, what are those? It's poetry, dude. So I totally understand, you know, what I'm getting into when I get into contemporary poetry. It's not always my jam. I like things in writing and in general that are a little juicier. If it is going to be something that's short and punchy, it really has to be punchy. I like play on words. I like things that capture very complicated emotions in just a few short lines. Things that are overly simple, as I was talking about before, even though it's in a poetry kind of format, it just isn't my jam. That all said, I loved Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and I think I gave that 4 or 5 out of 5 stars when I originally read it. I bought this as soon as it came out, and again was sitting on my shelves for quite a while, but I finally got around to it, and unfortunately I did not enjoy this book as much as her first book. It's very interesting because on reviews of her first book, a lot of people were making fun of like the shorter poems or whatnot, asking for longer poems, and there are a lot of longer poems in this, and I didn't like them. They didn't have that like short punchy, take an entire experience and put it into just a couple of lines thing that I loved about her original poetry. And I thought it was a little overly simplistic at times, and it wasn't as good to me as the first one. It's still very great, and there are definitely lines that are quotable and that hit home, but as a collection, I liked the first one better. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's talk about it down in the comments. I'm also really dry on like video ideas. I owe you guys videos from the end of 2018 and I'm working on those, but like otherwise, I've read a couple additional books besides these, which will go in next time's wrap up, but I don't know what else to talk about. So if there's anything, yes, I'm gonna ask for ideas, free help. If there's anything you'd like to see me talk about or any questions that you have, let me know down in the comments as well. I'd be happy to just, I don't know, I need inspiration. This was me getting inspiration in case you were wondering. So let's chat. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Book number 2 was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid.